I'm Jennifer Stein, your host for Mainline Mufon here at MLTV Mainline Network, formerly Radnor Studio Channel 21. It's the public access channel for the mainline suburbs of Northwest Philadelphia here in Pennsylvania. MUFON stands for the Mutual UFO Network. It's a 50-year-old organization dedicated to the scientific exploration of the UFO phenomenon for the betterment of humanity. You can learn more about our group at mainlinemufon.com. My guest today is Warren Fentress. Warren's father worked for NASA as an engineer, testing the spacesuits for the Apollo space missions. Warren was a gifted child and placed in early academic programs for math, science, and music. He went to Indiana University and graduated with an independent major in math, physics, and computer sciences with a minor in music. His senior project was a computer-controlled laser system, which landed him his first job as a laser engineer for a medical company in California. From there, he went to work for Hughes Aircraft as a laser engineer on a secret DoD program before he switched careers as just a software developer for Paramount Studios. This eventually led him to working for Sony, and he developed the PlayStation product. After 3 years of producing video games, he went to New York City to work for Pfizer for web development. When Pfizer outsourced his department, he took a job as a director of an ad agency doing software development. Everything changed in Warren's life in 2002 when he received a telepathic message from an extraterrestrial etheric being, which lasted for 5 days. He downloaded mathematical formulas and specific universal metaphysical concepts, which led to the creation of an award-winning toy called MagneBlocks and a Terraphonics, a four-dimensional sound system. Warren is now developing this. When this download described itself as a conscious wave that Warren was able to tune into as a broadcast of information that was possible through a planetary alignment that only occurs once every 1,000 years. This download intensified Warren's awareness of sacred geometry, helping him develop his current research in Sphereology, which is a new mathematical methodology used to study spherical geometry. Warren recognized that all life forms stem from this spherical toroids, also referred to as helix spheroids. Warren also had an instinctive knowledge that intelligence beings exist throughout the universe. In 2014, Warren had a daylight sighting near the Danbury Airport with 2 other witnesses. It was a metallic orb about 30 to 50 feet in diameter, hovering silently about 800 feet above them. After this event, Warren joined the Mutual UFO Network and became a field investigator, and he now devotes his time to continuing UFO investigations and developing some of the technology based on this 2004 download. He's coming out with a book entitled Inventing MagneBlocks, which will be available in January of 2020.
Hopefully.
So I'm so thrilled to have you come and present for Mainline Mufon.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming down from Connecticut
My pleasure.
and sharing. It's very interesting that your father tested the spacesuits for the early Apollo missions. Did that affect your interest in space, do you think?
Massively, a big way. I don't know if I had a natural interest in space as a child because it was there with me from my birth. And my dad would bring home equipment from, well, at the time I remember I was like 3, we were in Houston, and he was working at the Johnson Flight Center, and he would bring home space helmets and backpacks and all this stuff, and he would take me out to the plant, and I would get to play around in the simulators, and it was just, I was fascinated, I was hooked. And so I don't know, would I have been interested in it had he not been there for me? I don't know, I wonder, but it is very interesting stuff. I probably would have come to it regardless. And yeah, so, but yeah, he was a big inspiration in my life, and I miss him a lot.
Now, I understand that while you worked for the DoD, you sort of decided you didn't want to work in that department or that field. Do you want to chat a little bit? Many people I speak with say that, oh, we don't have, you know, sophisticated weapons in space, and I usually say, no, the whole platform of war is managed from space. Do you have any comments about that?
Well, when I worked at Hughes Aircraft, which has long since been sold, it was sold to GM, and I don't even know who owns the contracts, if they're still in existence. These things do change a lot. But what I found when I went to work there, I was really excited because I'm a technology guy, fascinated by the science of it, and they had the state-of-the-art facilities, stuff that was beyond the stuff I played with in college. And, you know, and the universities have really good equipment. And then you go into work for DOD, and I mean, this is Star Wars, you know, coming at you. And the truth is, the project that I work on, it was a secret program. The technology that I saw was a good 10 years, if not more, beyond what you knew existed in the public space. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So we definitely have a technical capability that is beyond what we would think. So if you imagine having an iPhone now, where were we 10 or 15 years ago? We didn't have those smartphones, and you didn't imagine what the world was like then. And it's changed in this time. So imagine another 10 or 15 years from now, what our world will be like. Well, that's what exists in the aerospace industry now.
You mentioned in your presentation last night one of the comments that an astronaut made while he was going around the backside of the moon. I don't know if I can ask you to chat a little bit about that, but I found it really interesting how you described what the backside of the moon looks like.
Right. So my dad would never tell me this while he was alive. And when he got cancer, they gave him 2 months to live, and he actually lived for 14 months. And towards the end, you know, I pressed him during his life to tell me anything he knew about the secret work he did, and he wouldn't ever say anything, and you know, he kept his oath. But right at the end, I asked him if there was anything that, you know, he could remember that he thought was really interesting that he would like to share before he passed. And he said that when he was in Florida, he would be in Florida a lot on business, and he was wanting to be an astronaut. He was going to join the astronaut program, and my mom didn't want him to, so he didn't. But he would hang out with the guys. And Buzz mentioned, I think he said it was Buzz, because he said Neil was pretty straight and tight, but Buzz, with that nickname, was a little more of a partier. So he said that the dark side of the moon looked like flying over Manhattan.
Wow.
Not the entire dark side of the moon, but, you know, it looked like they flew over Manhattan on the
because it was all lit up.
Yeah, it seemed to be lit up by artificial structures.
I screened the Travis Walton film that I produced for a senior center here in our area called Martin's Run. And in the back of the room, a woman at the end of this, whose husband worked for NASA, raised her hand and said, my husband was involved in building an underground facility, military facility, with NASA, and that was in 1964.
Right.
And I just, my mouth dropped open, and I said, did everyone hear that? And she didn't choose to elaborate, and I just thanked her. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting. So like you said, there is a progression within the black world, within the black budget, you're referring to the black budget, that is usually quite top secret. And there are things
interesting,
maybe 30 years or 30 or 50 years ahead.
Right, yeah, but very possibly even that much, or even beyond that.
Right, maybe what Rich Dolan writes about, the breakaway society, it could be quite real.
Or what Ben Rich said about that they have the technology to take ET home. What's interesting though, like my dad, so before he passed, the last about 4 or 5 years of his life, he would give talks, and he had a good relationship with United Technologies where he worked, and he got a declassified document right before he passed away, like a year or so before he passed away. And in that, it shows, and I talk about this, that there is a secret space program that's been in effect since the 60s. And when I saw that, I was kind of floored, because I thought Skylab was the first space station that we had. No, we had space stations in the 60s. And this shows the astronauts, and it gives their names, and this is comes from United Technologies. This is legitimate. It's part of their space history series.
Right. It's
so that's
the
fascinating.
Manned Orbital...
The Manned Orbital Laboratory, right? There's that
right.
one, and then there's Manned Orbital Research Laboratory. There was another one. So so they've been doing stuff, yeah, a lot longer than we think.
That was an interesting picture. I appreciate you sharing
cool?
it. Yeah, it was really great. I can share that with the studio,
Great.
I hope, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about Danbury, 2014, and your observation that you made with a couple of other people. To describe that for us, and then also I want to talk about the download that occurred to you. So maybe we should do the download first, because that happened 10 years before.
Sure. Right. All right, well, so at the time I was doing a business with a friend of mine, and I was working at home on a project, and I was doing a lot of work in Adobe Illustrator. I was doing some logo design, and I kind of stumbled on this geometric property that I was exploring with the program, and I'm sitting there in front of my computer, and I'm home alone, and my wife at the time is at work, and I literally heard a voice that sounded like someone was standing right behind me, and I sort of jumped, and I got that back of the neck, prickle. And I looked around like, well, no one can be in the house. This is crazy. So that was weird, and I go back to work, and then I hear this voice again. And I'm like really freaked out, like, is there a worker outside the house? What's going on? I run around the house, I make sure, the doors are locked. And there's nobody here. Well, all right, well, maybe I'm hearing, I don't know, I'm picking up some voice, but I was very confused by it. So I sit back down again, and then I hear the voice again, and I talk about this in my book. So the detail of it is in my book, and I write down as best as I can recollect the actual sort of dialogue. But so I hear the voice, and I say to myself with my internal voice, that we all have. I said, like, I must be, overtired or something like this, and I said, I must be just, thinking about something else.
Yeah, you wonder if you're imagining.
Right, imagining it, and then literally the voice says to me, no, that's not your internal voice. This isn't your internal voice, and I start having this dialogue with what I later find is a conscious entity that described itself as a consciousness wave, which really they exist as electromagnetic energy, and it was a type of an etheric multi-personality. Like, it didn't have a single ego associated with it. It was almost like a hive type of consciousness energy that exists in the universe, and there are other entities like it. Some people, you think of angels as an etheric type being, possibly. So not that these were angels, but they were very high cosmic type of a being that's outside of our dimension of perception. There's a concept about density beings, like Corrigan talks about. I think this is from the Law of One, this idea of third, fourth, and fifth density. And it described itself at the time as a 5D being, which at the time I thought was 5-dimensional, but then I later learned, when I learned about the Law of One many years later, I think maybe it was this density idea that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I hear this voice, and I start, I'm kind of freaked out, but then I sort of just go with it. And I start taking notes on the computer, and then later on I'd get up from the computer and I'd go sit on my deck, and I would make handwritten notes, and I'm just transcribing what I'm hearing, basically. And then I'm having some interrogatory with it as well. So over the next 5 days, what was really interesting is I was working, while I was working on this business with a friend of mine, we were just a startup, so I was still having to make money. So I worked part-time as a piano teacher, and I'd have to teach every day from like 2 to 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So when I would have to leave for work, it's like the voice knew I had to go to work, so it would stop talking, and it would literally be like right when I needed to get ready to leave to go for work. So this happened like clockwork. I'd come home from work, and then I'd hear the voice again. And I didn't sleep for like 2 years after that. I was so inspired by this. But anyway, over the 5-day period, I would take all these notes, and it gave me some mathematical equations. It gave me different concepts. And so I've taken that work. Again, MagneBlocks is the result of just one of the ideas that I got from this download. And I was so concerned about hearing that voice because I knew from college that when you hear voices, it's considered schizophrenia. So I talked to my doctors. I had an MRI done. I found out, no, I didn't have schizophrenia because the voice stopped. And I haven't heard from it. I heard from it, like I heard a little bit of the voice about a year later, but then since that time I haven't heard the voice again, although I really would like to. I would really like to hear the voice again.
It's kind of overpowering because you have this sense of responsibility that you feel like you want to listen to it and you want to apply it and put it to good use, and then you're sometimes out of sync with the world around you that doesn't quite understand what it is to kind of have a download.
And I don't even know, like, I consider it an extraterrestrial being. Some people might call it like a spiritual being or a voice from God or something. So there's different ways you can consider what it is. It could have just been my imagination, as the song goes. But what's interesting is that what happened after that was so provident, as a friend of mine said, that literally you start to think like, well, maybe the future is already determined, like they talk about, is the future determined or not? And we don't know that it is, but it is. Because the next 5 years, everything just went right. And it was incredible that all these little synchronicities occurred that helped me bring this idea and what became MagneBlocks and Tetraphonics, this other idea, which I haven't commercialized yet, and I might at some point. The consumer audio market is very difficult to get into and very expensive, so I didn't try to get into that market. But some of the other inventions, I'm still exploring.
So let's look at MagneBlocks. I think you brought one with you, although this product is no longer on the market, and that's a story in itself. So this describe a little bit about what this product actually is and how it works. I mean, is there an analogy of it, like on the market, like
Sure.
Legos
So,
or something?
when I first started testing it, people were saying it was like a combination between Legos and Rubik's Cube, because there's a puzzle aspect to creating some of the shapes, like this star shape. And what's interesting is you can rearrange the blocks and make seashell shapes and different kinds of things, like hundreds of shapes from just a few blocks. So it's based on this idea of what's called sacred geometry, which is really just the geometry of how the universe exists. It's how energy flows, it's how air moves, it's how molecules align themselves. And so it's based on platonic solids, which are fundamental shapes that are attributed to Plato, although he didn't invent them per se, he just sort of cataloged them. And but they're not exactly platonic solids. There's a couple are platonic solids, and then some are variations of that. But then the whole system fits together, and when you start playing with it, you start seeing how shape really guides so much in our world, that everything's based upon form, and it's these fundamental forms that then lead to more complicated forms. So
right, it's like the building blocks of all things in nature. They form, they follow these, whether it's wood, metal, water, whatever. It's literally the building block shapes based on these platonic shapes.
Yeah, and the correlation with the work I'm doing now with the spheres is that the platonic shapes, or some of these shapes, they're really like the abstraction of, if you took a sphere and you want to enclose it in the minimal amount of surfaces, well, you start with a tetrahedron, because that's only 4 sides. You can't enclose a sphere in less than 4 sides. And then you add a side and you get a pyramid. And then you add a side and you get a prism or a cube. And so really these shapes enclose spherical volumes. So at first I started with these shapes, and now I'm working with the more fundamental aspect, which is the spheres.
The spheres, yes. And the spheres sort of reflect all organic life as well, right? So even the division of a cell functions on this same basic principle.
And energy, I think that waveforms do as well. So there's the idea of things being a particle or a wave. They talk about the wave-particle duality, or a quanta of energy, and that it has both aspects of it. And so fundamentally, I think any solid form, you can reduce it all to spheres if they're just put together right, and then the way the energies flow then look like a solid or feel like a solid surface.
So do you think it would be a benefit educationally to start with these, with these types of models for math models in the educational system that we have, both spheres and
of course. I
platonic
mean,
solids?
you know, that you had, when I was a kid, we had in this program called the Divergent Activities Program, was the gifted program when I was a kid, and they had blocks they called attribute blocks. But they were just blocks, the colored blocks, and they didn't really, you know, you couldn't stick them together, and you could move them around, but they weren't really that interesting. And the experiments, if you can call them that, the activities you did with them, you know, we're not that eye-opening. But with MagneBlocks, when the shapes stick together, you learn so much about polarity and color and shape, and these these things coming together, these aspects coming together, make it really easy for kids to grasp different concepts like area and volume, and even motion and
structure, even for understanding that, and also for fractals, understanding fractals.
That's
and
right,
how
big time.
pieces go together and how they automatically divide. It gives a conceptual holism to the understanding of math, rather than giving it to them in pieces and then making it more and more and more complicated.
Exactly, yeah. You can
the way
see
the standard model is taught, it's, you miss one piece and then nothing makes sense and you're lost. Right.
And what's really cool, too, is the way, when you talked about the fractal nature, that you see fractals on computer, which is a 2D, really 3D, but it's a 2D representation of this idea of self-similarity, of things repeating on different scales. And you can do that in MagneBlocks. Like, you can create a pyramid or a shape, and then you can create more, you can take that same shape and you can, I called it powering the shape. So you can have like one pyramid, and then you put together 5, and you have another larger pyramid, and then you put another 20, another 75 together, and then you have a larger pyramid like this. So you can actually see shape move and get bigger, and it's fractal and it's hard. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Well, part of your download also involved an understanding of sacred geometry in a way that you hadn't before. So I don't know if you want to chat a little bit about that and how that moved into the spherical understanding of nature, but...
Well, I'd like to say this, that growing up in an advanced math program and being taught what the standard curricula was, and then into college and graduate school, that the curricula that they gave me, like, they never talked really about sacred geometry at all, which is really a travesty. I think if children were taught this from the get-go, it makes math super exciting and interesting, and you see its connection to the greater world in much more interesting ways than just making money and balancing a checkbook, or, you know, calculating how much wood you need to, you know, cover your floor or whatever. That there's many exciting things that you can learn, and so you know, if kids could have this information sooner, versus myself, like, I had to get it from an extraterrestrial intelligence. It wasn't even in graduate school. Like, why are they not making this a part of the curricula? So that would be a great change in society if we could do that.
And then leaping into sound, you're probably familiar with cymatics work.
Right.
You know, this, you can throw talcum powder on a metal plate and then hit it with a violin.
That's where the spheres come in. Yeah, that's what's really exciting with the work I'm doing with what I'm just calling Spherology right now, like the science of spheres, which is an interesting word, sphere. There's no fear in sphere. But so yeah, with the spheres, that what's interesting, like you say, with the cymatics, that when you have the sphere moving, and you get the sinusoidal type of action, which is this wave motion, right? And so when you start looking at the waves, well, a wave is a planar or linear type of motion, and within the spheres, you've got a volume, and so I'm looking at helical waves now amongst the spheres. And so you can see from spheres how you get DNA really directly out of that structure. You get a double helix, a triple helix. You can get different numbered helixes from that. So one of the experiments I'm looking at doing is a cymatic approach with the spheres. So with what I've seen, like with Hans Jenny, he takes a vibrating metal plate, and like say he puts various substances on them and then hits them with different frequencies. Well, I've got a twist on that, I'll say, that I plan on doing with the spheres. So.
Well, we have about 5 minutes. Do you want to just chat a little bit about that twist, or how you see it as balls?
It creates a helical wave. The spheres create a helical wave. And so what's really profound is when I was looking at this, I first started with 2 spheres of different colors. And I would make models of them using ping pong balls. In fact, on my website, and you can see like that, the Sphereology, there's a, I have a group on Facebook, Spherology.
Are they magnetic?
Sphereology. They're not
magnetic?
right now. Now, what's really interesting, I bought some magnetic balls that were out for a little while called nanodots, and I did some testing with this. And you cannot take magnets and get a helical waveform in them. Okay, you can't, because the way the magnetic fields are, there's a positive and a negative.
And they'll repel each other.
Right, and so, well, or they'll attract it, depending on the orientation. But the fact is, when you try to create this helical wave in there, you can't do it, which I thought was, well, that's very interesting. Why? So what you need is you need a third state of matter. And basically, I'm trying to find a way to get manufactured very small, like tin balls, which will then accept the charge from both the positive and the negative. So it's really like a neutral, if you will.
Yes.
And if I can get these manufactured, I can do further research with that. So, you know, I'm trying to, at some point, I'll be putting a proposal out to try and raise money to do this. But the interesting thing is that with this third piece in there, you can get the helical wave, and without it, you can't. So in quarks and subatomic physics, you know, they talk about the states of quarks, and there's up and down and right and left and some, you know, strange and these different qualities of the quarks. Well, it may be more simplified than that, but that there may just be, there's 3 quarks required to create like an electron. So that idea of these 3 things may be fundamental. And, you know, maybe that's the trinity that we really want to talk about. It's like that it's positive, negative, and neutral. And so we need that third piece in there to get the helical wave. So anyway, that's the research I'm looking at right now. And it's very interesting. And what's also fascinating is that out of this helical geometry, I'm finding prime numbers. And that is extremely profound. Like, that's not something, you know, that nature's creating prime numbers. You know, that's fascinating. That is mind-blowing to me. So, and there's other structures that come out of it. With the 2 spheres, I'm able to encode binary information in there. So it's digital, and it's analog, and it's prime numbers. So this, I think there could be something very profound. I think there could be a kind of a profound mathematical property at work here. So that's what I'm hoping to uncover.
Wow. Wow, and that would certainly shift our educational model, because then you can really more easily teach things like, you know, programming and repeating loops and the appreciation of these prime number loops in mathematics, which relates right back to programming as well. Wow, but it's interesting that it's almost innate in nature.
Right. Right.
So then that leads back to, okay, well,
who designed
who
this?
designed that? Wow. Well,
Yeah,
it's such a pleasure having you here.
Well, thanks. I'm
and
glad to be here.
discussing these concepts. It's like trying to wrap your mind around infinity, or you know, the Bible code or something like this. You know.
Well, you know, we talk about rabbit holes like in ufology and how deep it is, and that, you know, you can go down looking at various aspects of that, and this idea of this geometry of nature is a equally large rabbit hole.
So if people watching want to learn how to reach you, what's the best way?
Well, I would say that if you go to MagneBlocks.com, I keep the website up even though I had to close the company. And if you want to find out why, you can buy the book. I'll be advertising that on the website on MagneBlocks.com.
And the name of that book will be?
Inventing MagneBlocks, My Cosmic Journey Through the International Toy Business. So it's got something about entrepreneurship and about inventing and about business and about this metaphysical experience that I had. So it's a very interesting, I hope, interesting read. So yeah, they'll be able to find it there. And then I've got groups on Facebook that, for example, my extraterrestrial work, you can get a hold of me through TETRA, the Extraterrestrial Research Association. And so that's an interesting group if you want to do more about ufology. And then Sphereology, that's another group you can have if you want to look at my work that I'm doing with the spheres.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. If you'd like to learn more about Mainline Mufon and come to some of our programs, you can find us at mainlinemufon.com. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer.